The gasoline-soaked rags were hidden behind my water heater when I found them, along with Tyler's detailed floor plan marking every exit from my apartment. "It'll look like faulty wiring," I heard him tell someone on the phone that night. 3 days later, I watched from across the street as his entire business empire burned to the ground. And he had no idea I was the one holding the match. The smell of gasoline still clings to my clothes as I write this. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But it's not from the fire. That was supposed to kill me. It's from the one that destroyed everything Tyler Matthews thought he owned. But let me start with the moment that changed everything. The moment I realized the man who claimed to love me was planning to burn me alive. It was a Tuesday evening in October when I found the evidence hidden in my own basement. I'd gone down to check the water heater after noticing my utility bills spiking, thinking maybe there was a leak or malfunction. That's when I saw them. Industrial-grade rags soaked in accelerant, carefully positioned behind the unit where they'd be overlooked by investigators. My hands trembled as I discovered the detailed blueprint of my apartment layout. Every window and door marked with red X's, every escape route systematically blocked out in Tyler's unmistakable handwriting. The notation in the corner made my blood freeze. Electrical fire, faulty wiring, insurance claim approved, no survivors expected. Tyler had been my boyfriend for 8 months. 8 months of flowers, romantic dinners, and increasingly desperate pleas for me to take him back after I'd ended things 3 weeks earlier. 8 months of believing his tears were real when he showed up at my door, begging for another chance. 8 months of thinking his inability to accept our breakup was just heartbreak, not homicidal rage. "Sarah, please," he'd sobbed just 5 days before I found the gasoline. "I can't live without you. We're meant to be together. You can't just throw away what we have." His voice had cracked with such genuine emotion that I'd almost wavered. Almost. "Tyler, it's over," I'd said firmly, my hand on the doorframe of my apartment. "I've told you this dozens of times. We want different things. I'm not changing my mind." It was the last time I'd said no. Apparently, it was also the last time he was willing to hear it. I should have seen the signs earlier, the way he'd started showing up at my work by coincidence after our breakup. How he somehow always knew my schedule, my lunch plans, which coffee shop I'd be at on Saturday mornings. The spare key to my apartment that had gone missing from my purse, I'd assumed I'd lost it, even changed the locks. But Tyler was resourceful. He'd been a contractor before starting his property development business. Breaking and entering wouldn't have been challenging for him. What I hadn't expected was the methodical planning. As I photographed every piece of evidence with shaking hands, I realized this wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated murder, disguised as tragedy, with a significant insurance payout as the bonus. My life insurance policy, one I'd taken, out when we were together and never thought to change, listed him as the beneficiary. $750,000 for accidental death. The timeline was mapped out on the back of the blueprint. Tyler knew I worked late on Thursdays, usually returning home around 9 p.m. when the building was quiet. He knew I always parked in the underground garage and took the back elevator to avoid my elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen, who liked to chat. He knew I always stopped to check my mail before heading upstairs. 23 minutes. That's how long. It would take for the accelerant-soaked rags to ignite the water heater's pilot light and create an explosion that would level half the building. I was supposed to die in 4 days, but Tyler had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman he thought he'd broken down with months of stalking and emotional manipulation. The scared, apologetic Sarah who'd listened to his sob stories and felt guilty for hurting him. That woman was done. In her place stood someone who'd learned from the master manipulator himself. See, while Tyler was planning my death, I'd been planning something else entirely. My friend Matthew, Detective Matthew Rodriguez from the downtown precinct, had been concerned about Tyler's behavior for weeks. "This isn't normal ex-boyfriend stuff, Sarah." He'd warned me after Tyler had followed me to 3 different restaurants. "This is stalking, and it's escalating." Matthew had been documenting Tyler's harassment, building a case that we could present to the district attorney. But now we had something much bigger than harassment charges. I called Matthew immediately, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I need you to come over right now. Bring your camera and evidence bags. And Matt, don't tell anyone else about this call." While I waited for Matthew to arrive, I began my own investigation. Tyler's laptop was still logged into his email account on my computer from months ago, another detail he'd forgotten about. What I found there made the gasoline and blueprints look like child's play. Emails to an insurance broker about updating beneficiary information for maximum payout scenarios. Research into building fire investigations and how long it typically took to determine cause. Most damning of all, a correspondence with someone named Zachary Klein about making it look convincing and eliminating the problem permanently. Tyler wasn't just planning to kill me. He was planning to make money from it. The final email in the chain was sent just 2 hours earlier. "Tomorrow night. Everything's in place. She'll never see it coming. Tomorrow night. Thursday. My late work. Night." As I photographed each email, each piece of evidence, each damning detail of Tyler's plan, I felt something shift inside me. The fear that had been controlling my life for months, the constant looking over my shoulder, the sleepless nights, the way I'd started avoiding my favorite places because he might show up, all of it crystallized into something much more powerful. Cold, calculated fury. Tyler wanted to play with fire? He was about to learn that some flames burn hotter than others. By the time Matthew arrived with his evidence collection kit, I'd already begun formulating my own plan. One that would not only save my life but ensure Tyler paid for every threat, every sleepless night, every moment of terror he'd put me through. "Jesus Christ, Sarah," Matthew whispered as he surveyed the basement. "This is attempted murder. With premeditation. He's looking at life in prison." "Not yet," I said quietly, watching him bag the gasoline-soaked rags. "First, I'm going to disappear, and then I'm going to destroy everything he's built, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but ashes." Matthew looked up at me sharply. "Sarah, what are you thinking?" I smiled for the first time in weeks, but it wasn't a happy expression. It was the smile of someone who'd just realized they held all the cards in a game their opponent didn't even know they were playing. I'm thinking Tyler Matthews is about to learn that playing with fire gets you burned. But let me take you back to the beginning, to who I was before Tyler Matthews turned my life into a nightmare. 18 months ago, I was Sarah Ackles. Yes, I kept my married name even after my divorce, mostly because changing all the paperwork seemed like more trouble than it was worth. I was 31, working as a financial analyst for Henderson & Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Seattle. My life was predictable in the best possible way. I had a corner office with a view of Elliott Bay, a reliable salary. That let me afford my one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, and a routine that kept me grounded after the chaos of my divorce 2 years earlier. My days started at 5:30 a.m. with a run through Cal Anderson Park, followed by coffee at Victrola on Pike Street, always a double-shot cortado, no sugar. I'd read the Seattle Times while eating oatmeal at my kitchen counter, standing because the small table was perpetually covered in client files I'd brought home. Work began at 8 sharp. Lunch was usually a salad at my desk while reviewing quarterly reports, and I'd leave by 6 unless it was end-of-month closing, which could stretch into the evening. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. After 3 years of marriage to a man who'd criticized everything from my coffee choice to my career ambitions, the simple freedom of deciding my own schedule felt revolutionary. My ex-husband, Jake, had been what my mother called traditionally minded. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Wanted a wife who'd eventually quit work to manage his household and raise his children. When I'd gotten my promotion to senior analyst, he'd sulked for weeks. When I'd started taking evening classes toward my CPA certification, he'd accused me of abandoning our marriage for a piece of paper. The divorce had been messy but necessary. Jake had fought me on everything: the apartment lease, the car payments, even who got the coffee maker we'd received as a wedding gift. In the end, I'd walked away with my retirement account, my car, and the crushing realization that I'd spent my 20s trying to shrink myself to fit someone else's expectations. So at 31, I was rebuilding. My apartment was small, but filled with things I actually liked. Plants that I somehow managed not to kill, books stacked on every available surface, a vintage record player my friend Debbie had found at a thrift store. The walls were painted a soft sage green that Jake would have hated, and my bedroom had blackout curtains because I'd discovered I slept better in complete darkness. Small freedoms, maybe, but they felt enormous after years of compromise. Work had become more than just a job. It was proof that I could be good at something without anyone's permission. I specialized in forensic accounting, tracing financial discrepancies, uncovering embezzlement, finding money that wasn't supposed to be missing. There was something deeply satisfying about solving financial puzzles, about following paper trails until they revealed the truth. My colleagues joked that I had a bloodhound's instinct for finding hidden assets, but I preferred to think of it as pattern recognition. Numbers don't lie, even when people do. My personal life was intentionally quiet. I'd go out for drinks with Debbie and my other friend Morgan from work, usually on Friday nights at a wine bar in Fremont where we'd complain about difficult clients and debate whether to order the cheese plate. Weekends were for errands, long runs, and catching up on reading. I'd taken a pottery class at the community center, tried yoga at 3 different studios before finding one I liked, and discovered I actually enjoyed cooking when I wasn't trying, to accommodate someone else's dietary restrictions. I wasn't looking for a relationship. After Jake, the idea of sharing my space and my decisions with someone else felt exhausting. I'd deleted all the dating apps after a series of disappointing coffee dates with men who'd either mansplained my own profession to me or spent the entire time talking about their ex-girlfriends. "You're too intimidating," one had told me after. I'd mentioned my work in financial forensics. "You probably analyze everything guys do wrong with money." He wasn't entirely wrong. Once you've seen how financial abuse works, how controlling someone's access to money is often the first step, in controlling their entire life, you tend to notice red flags other people miss. The way someone talks about their ex's spending habits, whether they expect to split a check or assume you'll pay, how they react when you mention your salary or your career goals. Jake had started by questioning my unnecessary purchases, then gradually taken over our entire budget, claiming he was better with money, despite the credit card debt I'd discovered during our divorce proceedings. So, yes, I was cautious. Maybe too cautious. Debbie was always encouraging me to get back out there, but I was content with my quiet life. I had work that challenged me, friends who supported me, and an apartment that felt like a sanctuary. I was learning to trust my own instincts again after years of second-guessing myself. That's what made Tyler so dangerous when he finally appeared. He didn't set off any of my carefully calibrated warning systems. He didn't push too hard or move too fast. He didn't criticize my independence or suggest I needed taking care of. Instead, he seemed genuinely impressed by my career, interested in my opinions, respectful of my boundaries. Looking back, I realized that Tyler had studied me before we even met. He'd learned exactly what I needed to hear, exactly how to present himself to slip past my defenses. While I was proud of my ability to spot financial lies and hidden agendas, I'd never considered that someone might be equally skilled at emotional deception. But that comes later in the story. In those quiet months before Tyler, I was genuinely happy for the first time in years. I was sleeping through the night, no longer jumping at unexpected phone calls or emails. I'd stopped apologizing for taking up space in conversations. I'd even started talking about maybe getting a cat, something Jake had always vetoed because he was allergic. I had no idea that someone was already watching me, learning my routines, planning how to insert himself into my carefully rebuilt life. I had no idea that my contentment would make me a target, or that the very independence I'd fought so hard to achieve would be exactly what Tyler wanted to destroy. The gym accident that changed my life happened on a rainy Thursday evening in March. I'd just finished a particularly grueling session with quarterly tax deadlines looming, and the elliptical machine at my usual Planet Fitness was calling my name. The place was mostly empty, just a few regulars and someone I'd never seen before using the weight machines in the corner. I was 20 minutes into my workout, headphones in, completely lost in a true crime podcast about financial fraud when the machine suddenly seized up. The momentum threw me forward, and I would have hit the console face first if strong hands hadn't caught my shoulders, steadying me before I could fall. "Whoa there," said a voice behind me. "These old machines can be dangerous. You okay?" I turned around to find myself looking into warm brown eyes belonging to a man about my age, maybe 6 feet tall with dark hair and the kind of genuine smile that reached his eyes. He was wearing a faded navy t-shirt that suggested military service, and there was a small scar along his jawline that somehow made him more approachable rather than intimidating. "I'm fine," I said, pulling out my earbuds and immediately feeling self-conscious about my sweaty workout clothes and probably disheveled hair. "Thank you. That could have been bad." "Tyler Matthews," he said, extending his hand. "And yeah, I've seen that machine do that before. The emergency stop mechanism is worn out. You'd think they'd fix it before someone gets hurt." "Sarah Ackles," I replied, shaking his hand and noting that his grip was firm but not aggressive. "You come here often? I haven't seen you before." "Just moved to the neighborhood," Tyler explained, grabbing a towel from a nearby dispenser and handing it to me. "I'm usually at the 24-hour fitness downtown, but I'm trying to find something closer to my new place. How's the equipment here usually?" We ended up talking for 20 minutes in the gym lobby. Tyler was easy to talk to. He asked questions about the neighborhood, mentioned he was in property development and had just bought a condo a few blocks away from my apartment building. He seemed genuinely interested when I mentioned my work in forensic accounting, asking intelligent questions about how financial investigations worked rather than glazing over or changing the subject like most people did. "That sounds fascinating," he said when I explained how I traced missing assets for divorce cases. "Like being a detective, but with spreadsheets instead of fingerprints." "Exactly," I laughed, surprised by how accurately he'd captured it. Though sometimes the numbers tell better stories than any witness. When we finally headed toward the parking garage, Tyler mentioned there was a great coffee shop he'd discovered. That morning, Analog Coffee on Capitol Hill. They roast their own beans, and the barista actually knows what a cortado is, he said. "If you're interested, maybe we could grab coffee sometime? I'd love to hear more about your work." I hesitated. It had been 8 months since my last disastrous coffee date, and I'd honestly enjoyed being single. But there was something different about Tyler. He wasn't trying too hard, wasn't using practiced pickup lines, and he'd asked about my career, rather than immediately steering the conversation toward his own accomplishments. "Sure," I found myself saying. "I actually get my coffee at Victrola usually, but I'm always open to trying somewhere new." "Saturday morning?" Tyler suggested. "Say 9 o'clock? I promise the coffee is worth switching up your routine for." Saturday. Morning at Analog turned into Saturday afternoon walking through Pike Place Market. Tyler was knowledgeable about the city, despite being relatively new to the area. He'd lived in Portland before this, he explained, and had moved to Seattle for a property development opportunity. He was working on converting an old warehouse in SoDo into loft apartments, a project that combined his background in construction with his business degree. I started out swinging hammers, he told me as we watched fish being thrown at Pike Place Fish Market. Worked construction through college to pay for my business courses, figured out I was better at managing projects than just building them, but I still like getting my hands dirty sometimes. What impressed me most was how he listened. When I mentioned my divorce, he didn't immediately launch into his own relationship, history, or offer unsolicited advice. When I talked about my work, he asked follow-up questions that showed he was actually paying attention. When I mentioned that I was learning to cook for one after years of accommodating someone else's preferences, he shared a story about burning pasta water during his first week living alone. I called my mom in panic, he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. She spent 20 minutes on the phone walking me through boiling water. I was 32 years old. How old are you now? I asked. 34. And I can successfully make pasta, scrambled eggs, and a decent grilled cheese sandwich. Basically, I'm a culinary master. The easy humor, the way he poked fun at himself instead of trying to impress me, felt refreshing after years of Jake's need to be right about everything. Tyler seemed confident but not arrogant, successful but not boastful. By the time we parted ways that afternoon, I realized I was genuinely looking forward to seeing him again. When he texted that evening, "Thanks for the great afternoon. That lavender honey you picked out at the market is amazing." I found myself smiling at my phone, like a teenager. Our second date was dinner at a small Italian place in Belltown that Tyler had found online. Nothing fancy, but the kind of neighborhood restaurant where the owner's mother made the pasta sauce and you could hear her arguing with the chef from the kitchen. Tyler had made reservations but wasn't rigid about the plan when I mentioned I'd rather sit outside despite the slight chill. I spend most of my time indoors staring at spreadsheets, I explained. Any chance to be outside, I take. Good call, Tyler agreed, asking the server for the patio table. I get enough of climate control on construction sites. It was during that second dinner that I realized how much I'd been limiting myself since my divorce. I'd become so focused on protecting my independence that I'd forgotten what it felt like to genuinely enjoy someone's company. Tyler didn't try to order for me or suggest what I should eat. He didn't monopolize the conversation or check his phone constantly. When I mentioned that I was thinking about getting a cat, he asked what kind I was considering rather than immediately sharing his opinion about pet ownership. I've never had a pet as an adult, I admitted. Jake was allergic to everything, and before that I was too busy with school and work. That's exciting, Tyler said, and he seemed to mean it. First pet is a big deal. Have you thought about going to the shelters, or are you set on a specific breed? 3 weeks later, when Tyler mentioned he'd seen a kitten adoption event happening at Petco and wondered if I wanted to check it out, I knew I was in trouble. Not because there was anything wrong with Tyler, quite the opposite. He was thoughtful, funny, respectful of my time and space, and genuinely interested in my life beyond how it related to him. The trouble was that I was falling for him, and I hadn't planned on falling for anyone. The kitten adoption event turned into the day I adopted Luna, a tiny gray tabby with white paws who seemed determined to climb onto my shoulder every time I tried to look at other cats. Tyler stood back and let me make the decision entirely on my own, but I caught him smiling when Luna started purring against my neck. "I think you've been chosen," he said quietly, not pushing but clearly charmed by the whole scene. "I think you're right," I admitted, already mentally rearranging my apartment to accommodate a litter box and scratching post. Tyler helped me carry the supplies to my car, food, toys, a cat bed that Luna would probably ignore in favor of my keyboard, but he didn't invite himself up to my apartment to help me set everything up. That small gesture of respect for my boundaries meant more to me than he probably realized. "Text me how the first night goes," he said as I loaded the cat carrier into my back seat. "I bet she'll be running the place by morning." He was right. By the time I woke up the next day, Luna had claimed the sunny spot by my bedroom window, knocked 3 books off my nightstand, and somehow managed to get cat hair on every piece of black clothing I owned. When I sent Tyler a photo of her sprawled Across my laptop keyboard, he responded immediately. Looks like she's helping with your forensic accounting. That became our pattern over the next few weeks. Easy text conversations throughout the day, photos of Luna's latest antics, Tyler sharing updates from his construction sites. He was working long hours on the Soto project, dealing with permit, delays and contractor issues, but he always seemed to have time to respond to my messages. Never pushy, never demanding immediate replies. Just present. Our third date was a Saturday morning farmer's market visit that turned into an impromptu cooking lesson at my apartment. Tyler had mentioned he was hopeless beyond grilled cheese, and I'd offered to teach him how to make a decent pasta sauce from the San Marzano tomatoes we'd found at the market. Fair warning, I said as we climbed the stairs to my apartment. Luna has no boundaries and will probably try to supervise everything. We do. I'm looking forward to meeting the boss, Tyler replied, and I felt that flutter in my stomach that I'd almost forgotten was possible. Luna approved of Tyler immediately, which should have been my first red flag. She was usually suspicious of strangers, but within minutes of Tyler sitting on my couch, she was curled up in his lap, purring like a tiny motor. Tyler absently scratched behind her ears while asking about the framed photos on my bookshelf, my college graduation, a hiking trip with Debbie and Morgan, my parents at their anniversary dinner last year. Your parents look happy, he observed, studying the photo of them laughing at some restaurant in Chinatown. 42 years this October, I said, pulling ingredients from my refrigerator. They still hold hands when they walk down the street. It's both inspiring and slightly nauseating. Nauseating how? Oh, you know. When you've been through a divorce, seeing people who still genuinely like each other after 4 decades can be intimidating. Tyler was quiet for a moment, still petting Luna. Do you think your divorce made you more cautious? About relationships? Or just more realistic? It was a surprisingly perceptive question, the kind that made me pause with a can of tomatoes halfway to the counter. Both, I think. I spent 3 years trying to be someone I wasn't. Now I'm probably too protective of who I actually am. Good, Tyler said simply. You should protect that. The cooking lesson turned into 3 hours of the most natural conversation I'd had with anyone in months. Tyler was genuinely terrible at cooking. He somehow managed to burn water while boiling pasta, but he laughed at his mistakes instead of getting frustrated. When I showed him how to properly dice an onion, he paid attention like I was teaching him advanced calculus. You're very methodical, he observed, watching me work. Is that from the accounting background? Or are you just naturally organized? Probably both. My ex-husband used to say I was too rigid, but I think there's something comforting about having systems that work. Your ex-husband sounds like an idiot, Tyler said mildly, then immediately looked embarrassed. Sorry, that was out of line. No, he really was, I laughed. But thank you for the solidarity. The pasta sauce turned out perfectly despite Tyler's efforts to help. We ate it at my small kitchen table while Luna wound herself around our ankles, clearly hoping for dropped food. Tyler asked about my work again, not just the broad strokes, but the details of how I traced hidden assets, how I could tell when someone was lying about their finances. It's pattern recognition mostly, I explained. People think they're being clever, but money leaves footprints. Unexplained cash deposits, sudden lifestyle changes that don't match reported income, assets transferred to family members right before a divorce filing. It's all there if you know how to look. That must make dating interesting, Tyler said. Do you find yourself analyzing potential boyfriends' spending habits? Occupational hazard, I admitted. Though honestly, most people are pretty transparent about their financial red flags. They'll mention debt loads or spending problems within the first few dates. It's the ones who are too careful about money talk that make me nervous. Too careful. How? Evasive about their job, vague about their living situation, always paying in cash. In my experience, people who are genuinely stable financially don't mind talking about it. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense. What about people in construction or real estate? We deal with a lot of cash transactions, irregular income, project-based work. Does that automatically throw up red flags? Not if they can explain it, I said. It's the explanations that don't add up that bother me. Like if someone says they're a contractor but they've never heard of a 1099, or they claim to flip houses but can't explain how capital gains taxes work. Good point. I never thought about how your job would affect how you see relationships. As the evening wore on, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't with anyone since before my marriage. Tyler was easy to be around. He didn't dominate the conversation or try to impress me with exaggerated stories. When I mentioned that I was thinking about taking a pottery class, he asked what drew me to ceramics rather than immediately sharing his own creative interests. When Luna knocked over my water glass, he helped clean it up without making a big production of it. By the time he left around 10 o'clock, I realized we'd been talking for nearly 6 hours without a single awkward pause or moment where I'd wished he would leave. He kissed me goodnight, our first kiss, on my doorstep, soft and brief and somehow perfect in its restraint. I had a really good time, he said, and I could tell he meant it. Me too, I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. After he left, I sat on my couch with Luna purring in my lap, replaying the evening. For the first time since my divorce, I could imagine myself in a relationship again. Tyler felt safe in a way that had nothing to do with physical protection and everything to do with emotional security. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding me rather than changing me. I should have trusted that instinct that something was too good to be true. I should have wondered why someone so seemingly perfect had appeared in my carefully ordered life at exactly the moment when I was finally happy alone, but I didn't. Instead, I fell asleep that night with a smile on my face, already looking forward to seeing him again. 2 months into dating Tyler, he asked me to be his girlfriend. Not in some grand romantic gesture, but during a quiet Sunday morning when we were reading the newspaper at his kitchen table. Luna sprawled across both our laps like she owned the place. I'd started staying over on weekends, bringing an overnight bag and leaving a toothbrush in his bathroom. So, Tyler said, looking up from the sports section, I was wondering if you'd want to make this official. The girlfriend-boyfriend thing. I laughed at the casual way he asked, like he was suggesting we split a pizza. Are we in high school? Hey, I never had a proper girlfriend in high school. Tyler grinned. Humor me. Sarah Ackles, will you be my girlfriend? Tyler Matthews, I replied with mock solemnity. I thought you'd never ask. His condo was everything mine wasn't. Spacious, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Tyler's furniture was expensive but comfortable, the kind of neutral, masculine style that suggested either a good eye for design or a professional decorator. Did you furnish this yourself? I asked one evening, running my hand along his leather sectional. Guilty as charged, Tyler admitted. Though I had help from my sister, she has much better taste than I do. Left to my own devices, I'd probably have a recliner and a TV and call it decorated. It was the first time he'd mentioned family, and I realized how little I actually knew about Tyler's background beyond his work. Tell me about your sister. Francine. She lives in Portland with her husband and 2 kids. She's 3 years older and never lets me forget it. She was the one who convinced me to move to Seattle, actually. Said I was getting too comfortable in my routine. Smart sister. She wants to meet you, Tyler said, and something in his tone made me look up from the wine I was pouring. She's coming to visit next month. I told her about you, and she threatened to disown me if I don't introduce you. The idea of meeting his family felt significant, a step toward something more serious than casual dating. What did you tell her about me? That you're beautiful, brilliant, and way too good for me. And that you have a cat who's probably plotting my demise. Luna likes you, I protested. Luna tolerates me because I give her the good treats. There's a difference. Meeting Francine turned out to be surprisingly easy. She was warm and funny, with Tyler's same easy laugh and an ability to make even awkward small talk feel natural. She grilled me about my work, my hobbies, and my intentions toward her baby brother, but in a way that felt protective rather than invasive. He's different with you, she told me over coffee while Tyler was at the hardware store. More settled. Tyler has always been a bit of a wanderer, never quite satisfied with where he was. But with you, he seems content. Good different or concerning different? I asked. Definitely good. He talks about you constantly. Sarah thinks this, Sarah does that. It's nauseating and adorable. Francine stirred her latte thoughtfully. He's never been serious about anyone before. I was starting to think he was going to be one of those eternal bachelor types. That evening, after Francine had left for her hotel, Tyler and I lay in his bed talking about families and futures. I told him about my parents' solid marriage, how they'd built a life together, through small daily choices rather than grand romantic gestures. Tyler talked about growing up with a single mother after his father died when he was 12, how Francine had basically helped raise him. Is that why you went into construction? I asked. Wanting to build things after losing your dad so young? Tyler was quiet for a long moment. Maybe. I never really thought about it that way. But yeah, there's something satisfying about creating something solid, something that will last. It was during that conversation that Tyler first said he loved me. Not in response to anything I'd said, just quietly, into the darkness of his bedroom. I love you, Sarah. I felt my breath catch. It had been almost a year since anyone had said those words to me, and longer since I'd believed them. I love you, too. A week later, Tyler gave me a key to his condo. I know we haven't talked about moving in together, he said, but I like having you here. And Luna has clearly claimed the guest bedroom, so... Are you asking me to move in? I'm asking if you'd want to. Eventually, when it feels right. The key felt heavy in my palm, significant in a way that seemed disproportionate to its size. Can I think about it? Of course, no pressure. I just want you to know the option is there. I did think about it, for weeks. My lease wasn't up for another 6 months, but Tyler's place was bigger, nicer, and closer to both our jobs. More importantly, I liked the version of myself that existed in Tyler's space. I was more relaxed there, less guarded. Tyler had a way of making even mundane activities feel special. Grocery shopping became an adventure in trying new ingredients. Sunday mornings stretched into lazy afternoons of reading and talking. The decision was made for me when my apartment building's management company announced they were converting to condos. All tenants had to either buy their units or move out. By the end of the year. That's actually perfect timing, Tyler said when I told him over dinner. If you want it to be. Are you sure? Living together is a big step. What if we drive each other crazy? Then we'll figure it out, Tyler said simply. But I don't think we will. Moving in with Tyler felt different from when I'd lived with Jake. Tyler made space for my things without complaint, even when Luna's scratching post clashed with his minimalist aesthetic. He didn't try to reorganize my books or suggest better places for my plants. When I wanted to replace his sterile bathroom with warmer towels and actual art on the walls, he handed me his credit card and told me to go crazy. I want you to feel at home here, he said. This is our place now, not just mine. The transition was surprisingly smooth. We developed new routines. Tyler made coffee in the mornings while I fed Luna. I cooked dinner while he cleaned up from breakfast. Tyler worked, later than I did, so I usually had an hour alone in the evenings to decompress before he came home. He'd find me reading on the couch or working on laptop at the kitchen table, and we'd share our days over whatever I'd managed to cook. You know, Tyler said one evening about a month after I'd officially moved in, I think this might be the happiest I've ever been. Might be? I teased. Definitely is, he corrected, pulling me closer on the couch. I never understood what people meant when they talked about finding their person. But with you, everything just fits. I knew exactly what he meant. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly the right person. The future we'd started planning felt not just possible but inevitable. Maybe marriage eventually, definitely travel, possibly kids if we both decided we wanted them. I was so completely, blissfully happy that I never questioned whether Tyler's contentment was as genuine as mine. I never wondered why someone who'd been a wanderer would settle down so completely and so quickly. I never asked myself why Tyler seemed to know exactly what to say and do to make me feel safe. I was too busy falling deeper in love to notice that I was also falling into a perfectly constructed trap. The 8 months Tyler and I lived together, before everything fell apart, were the happiest of my adult life. We had settled into a rhythm that felt natural and effortless, like we'd been together for years instead of less than a year. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of coffee and find Tyler already dressed for work, reading emails on his phone while Luna wound around his ankles demanding breakfast. "Your cat has expensive taste," he'd say, opening a can of the premium food he'd started buying without me asking. She rejected the grocery store brand immediately. "She's very discerning," I'd reply, stealing a sip of his coffee before pouring my own. "Good thing you can afford to spoil her." Tyler's construction business was thriving. The Sodo warehouse conversion had been completed ahead of schedule and under budget, earning him recognition in the local business community and several new high-profile projects. He'd been featured in Seattle Business Magazine as one of the 30 under 35 to watch, and the article sat framed on his office desk alongside photos of us from various trips. We'd started traveling together, weekend getaways to Victoria, a long weekend in San Francisco, a week in Hawaii that Tyler had surprised me with for my 32nd birthday. He was thoughtful about planning trips around my work schedule, never pushing when I had important deadlines, always making sure Luna was well cared for by our neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who'd become quite attached to her. "You two are sickeningly perfect," Debbie observed one Friday evening when we were all out for drinks. Tyler had texted that he was running late from a site meeting, and I'd been checking my phone more frequently than usual. "Seriously, Sarah, you're glowing. It's disgusting." "We're not perfect," I protested, though I couldn't keep the smile off my face. "We have our moments." "Like what?" Morgan asked, leaning forward with interest. "Give us something. One fight, one disagreement, anything to prove you're human." I thought about it seriously. Tyler and I did disagree sometimes. He preferred action movies while I loved documentaries. He was a morning person while I was naturally a night owl. He liked to plan everything while I enjoyed spontaneous decisions. But these felt like preferences rather than fundamental incompatibilities. "He squeezes the toothpaste from the middle of the tube," I offered weakly. "That's not a fight. That's a quirk," Debbie laughed. "Come on, what about something real? Money? Family? Future plans?" The truth was, Tyler and I were remarkably aligned on the important things. We both wanted to travel more. We were both ambivalent about having children but open to the possibility. We both valued financial security but didn't need extravagant lifestyles. Tyler respected my career ambitions, and I supported his business goals. We'd even started talking about buying a house together, maybe something with a yard where Luna could safely explore. "He wants to get married," I admitted finally. "Not immediately, but eventually. And I think I want that too." The admission surprised me. After my divorce from Jake, I'd been convinced that marriage was an outdated institution designed to trap women into domestic servitude. But with Tyler, the idea of formal commitment felt different. It felt like a celebration of what we'd already built rather than a limitation on what we could become. Tyler had brought up marriage casually a few months earlier, while we were assembling IKEA furniture for his home office. "You know," he'd said, wrestling with unclear instructions for a bookshelf. "When we get married, I'm hiring professionals to put together all our furniture." "When we get married?" I'd asked, pausing with a screw halfway into place. "If we get married," Tyler corrected quickly. "I mean, if you want to. Eventually. No pressure." But there had been no anxiety in his voice, no uncertainty. He'd said it, like he was discussing what we'd have for dinner or which movie to watch, like it was a natural progression rather than a life-altering decision. "I'd want a small wedding," I'd said after a moment. "Nothing fancy. Maybe just family and close friends." "Perfect," Tyler had replied, kissing my temple. I was thinking the same thing. That conversation had happened 3 months ago, and since then, marriage had become a comfortable part of our future planning. Not urgent, but inevitable. Tyler had even started pointing out engagement rings in jewelry store windows, asking what styles I preferred, whether I liked traditional settings or more modern designs. "I'm thinking next spring," he'd said one evening while we were walking, along the waterfront. "Maybe a small ceremony somewhere with a view. Your parents could fly out, Francine could bring the kids. Keep it simple, but meaningful." "That sounds perfect," I'd agreed, and meant it completely. My career was flourishing, too. I'd been promoted to senior financial analyst and had started taking on more complex fraud investigations. The work was challenging and rewarding, and Tyler was genuinely proud of my successes. When I'd solved a particularly difficult embezzlement case that had stumped other investigators, Tyler had surprised me with champagne and my favorite takeout from the Thai restaurant down the street. "To my brilliant girlfriend," he'd toasted, "who catches the bad guys with spreadsheets." "To your support," I'd replied, "which makes everything else possible." Even our social life had improved. Tyler got along well with Debbie and Morgan, and I enjoyed spending time with his friends from work and the construction industry. We'd hosted dinner parties at the condo, attended charity events for causes we both cared about, and generally felt like functioning adults who had figured out how to balance work, relationship, and personal time. Luna had adjusted beautifully to having Tyler around full-time. She'd claimed his side of the bed as her territory, and had learned that sitting on his laptop keyboard during video calls was an effective way to get attention. Tyler pretended to be annoyed, but I'd caught him, sneaking her treats and talking to her in baby talk when he thought I wasn't listening. "You know she's going to expect this level of service for the rest of her life," I'd warned him after finding him constructing an elaborate cardboard castle for her entertainment. "Good thing I plan to be around for the rest of her life," Tyler had replied without looking up from his architectural project. It was comments like that, casual assumptions about our shared future, that made me feel secure in a way I'd never experienced before. Tyler wasn't just planning dates or trips, he was planning a life with me in it. When he talked about expanding his business, he included considerations about how it would affect our time together. When I mentioned wanting to eventually pursue my CPA certification, he immediately started researching programs and offering to adjust his schedule to accommodate my studies. "We're a team," he'd said simply when I'd thanked him for his support. "Your success is my success." Looking back now, I realize that sense of security was exactly what Tyler was counting on. He needed me to feel safe, loved, and completely invested in our future together. He needed me to trust him implicitly, to share everything with him, to make him the center of my world. Because when someone trusts you completely, they don't question the small inconsistencies. They don't investigate the gaps in your stories. They don't protect themselves against the person they love most. Tyler had spent 8 months building the perfect trap, and I had walked into it willingly, gratefully, thinking I was walking into the rest of my life. The beginning of the end started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in September. I was getting ready for work, applying mascara in the bathroom mirror while Tyler showered, when his phone rang on the nightstand. Usually, Tyler's business calls came to his office line or through his project managers, so the early personal call seemed unusual. "Tyler Matthews," he answered, stepping out of the shower with a towel around his waist. His tone was professional, but I noticed the slight tension in his shoulders as he listened to whoever was speaking. "When?" Tyler asked, his voice dropping lower. "How bad is it?" I paused with my mascara wand halfway to my lashes, watching Tyler's reflection in the bathroom mirror. His face had gone pale, and he was gripping the phone tighter than necessary. "I'll be there in an hour," Tyler said finally. "Don't call anyone else until I get there." He hung up and stood motionless for a moment, staring at the phone. "Everything okay?" I asked, turning to face him. Tyler seemed to shake himself back to awareness. "Problem with the Belltown project," he said, already moving toward the closet to get dressed. "Pipe burst overnight, flooded the first 2 floors. I need to get over there and assess the damage." "Oh no," I said, genuine sympathy in my voice. "How bad do you think it'll be?" "Could be nothing, could be everything," Tyler replied, pulling on clothes with practiced efficiency. "Insurance will cover most of it, but the delays—" He shook his head. "I might be late tonight. Don't wait up if I'm not back by 10. I kissed him goodbye at the door, watching him leave with his phone already pressed to his ear, presumably calling his insurance company. It was the first time I'd seen Tyler genuinely stressed about work, and I felt a flutter of concern for both him and his business. That evening, Tyler didn't come home until almost midnight. I was reading in bed when I heard his key in the lock, followed by the sound of him moving quietly through the apartment, clearly trying not to wake me. "Hey," I called softly. "How bad was it?" Tyler appeared in the bedroom doorway looking exhausted. His usual composure was cracked around the edges, and there were dark circles under his eyes I hadn't noticed that morning. "Bad," he said simply, sitting on the edge of the bed to remove his shoes. "Worse than I thought. The flooding compromised some of the electrical work we'd already completed. We're looking at 3 weeks minimum to get back on schedule, maybe more." "I'm sorry," I said, reaching over to rub his shoulders. "But you said insurance will cover it, right?" Tyler was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was strained. "Most of it. But there are always gaps, you know? Deductibles, lost time, penalty clauses for late completion. This could cost me, well, a lot." It was the first time Tyler had ever sounded uncertain about his financial situation. Throughout our relationship, money had never been a concern for him. He paid for dinners, trips, expensive gifts for Luna, without ever mentioning budgets or constraints. To hear him worried about costs was unsettling. "How much is a lot?" I asked gently. "Hard to say until we get the full assessment," Tyler replied, lying down beside me with his clothes still on. "Could be 50,000, could be more. And that's assuming no other problems surface while we're fixing this one." I did quick mental math in my head. I had about 30,000 in savings, plus my steady salary. If Tyler needed help, I could contribute. We were planning a future together anyway. Supporting each other through difficult times was part of that commitment. "You know I can help, right?" I offered. "I mean, if you need a loan or something temporary while insurance sorts things out." Tyler turned to look at me, something unreadable in his expression. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." "We're partners, Tyler. Your problems are my problems." "I love you," Tyler said quietly, pulling me closer. "But I need to handle this myself. It's my business, my responsibility." I wanted to argue, to insist that we were a team and should face challenges together. But Tyler's pride was clearly wounded. The last thing he needed was me pushing when he was already feeling vulnerable. Over the next few days, Tyler's stress level increased noticeably. He left earlier in the mornings and came home later in the evenings, often with his phone constantly buzzing with calls from contractors, insurance adjusters, and project managers. Our easy morning routine disappeared as Tyler became consumed with managing the crisis. "How's the Belltown situation?" I asked one evening over dinner. "Getting worse," Tyler admitted, pushing food around his plate without eating much. "The electrical damage was more extensive than we thought, and now the city inspector is asking questions about permits that were supposedly filed months ago." Permits? Some? "Paperwork got mixed up in the transition between project managers," Tyler explained vaguely. "Nothing serious, just bureaucratic nonsense, but it means more delays while we sort everything out." I nodded sympathetically, though something about Tyler's explanation felt incomplete. In all the time I'd known him, Tyler had been meticulous about business details. The idea that permits had been mixed up seemed out of character, but I pushed the thought away. Tyler was under enormous pressure, and questioning his competence wasn't supportive. What he needed was understanding, not interrogation. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked. "I'm good with paperwork, and my accounting background might be useful for dealing with insurance claims." "Thanks, but I've got it covered," Tyler said, giving me a tired smile. "Just having you here makes everything easier." What I didn't realize was that Tyler's crisis was about to become our crisis. And the man I thought I knew so well was about to reveal capabilities I never could have imagined. 3 weeks after the Belltown flooding, Tyler's behavior had shifted in subtle but noticeable ways. The confident, easygoing man I'd fallen in love with was being replaced by someone more anxious, more secretive, more prone to mood swings that seemed to come from nowhere. "I think I need to take on some additional projects," Tyler announced one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner. "Smaller ones, quick turnaround, to help offset the Belltown losses." "That makes sense," I said, loading plates into the dishwasher. "What kind of projects?" Tyler was vague in his response, mentioning residential renovations and commercial repair work. But when I asked about specific clients or locations, he'd change the subject or claim he was still negotiating details. For someone who'd previously loved talking about his work, his sudden evasiveness was concerning. Money became a constant undercurrent of tension. Tyler started declining dinner invitations, suggesting we cook at home instead of going out, mentioning that we should tighten the belt until his business recovered. I offered again to help financially, but Tyler's pride seemed increasingly fragile around the topic. "I don't need you to take care of me, Sarah," he'd said sharply when I'd suggested I could cover groceries for a while. "I'm not some charity case." "I never said you were," I'd replied, stung by his tone. "I just thought—" "I know what you thought," Tyler had interrupted, "but I've got this handled. I always land on my feet." It was the first time Tyler had ever spoken to me with anything approaching hostility, and the memory of it lingered uncomfortably between us for days afterward. He'd apologized later, blaming stress and exhaustion, but something fundamental had shifted in our dynamic. Tyler started working longer hours, leaving before I woke up and returning after I'd gone to bed. When I did see him, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone, making hushed calls that he'd end abruptly when I entered the room. Our conversations became surface-level exchanges about schedules and household logistics rather than the deep, easy talks that had characterized our relationship. "You're like ships passing in the night," Debbie observed when I mentioned Tyler's increased work schedule during our weekly lunch. "That's not sustainable long-term." "It's temporary," I insisted, though I was beginning to wonder if I was trying to convince her or myself. "Once he gets past this rough patch, things will go back to normal." "And when will that be?" Morgan asked. "Because you've been saying temporary for a month now." I didn't have a good answer. Tyler's timeline for recovery kept shifting. First, it would be resolved by the end of September, then October. Then he stopped giving timelines altogether. When I'd asked him directly about his projections, he'd become defensive. "These things take time, Sarah," he'd said. "You can't put a business crisis on a schedule." But my forensic accounting background made me naturally suspicious of vague financial explanations. I'd seen too many cases where temporary setbacks were actually symptoms of much larger problems. The pattern recognition skills that made me good at my job were starting to activate around Tyler's situation, and I didn't like what they were suggesting. One evening in early October, I came home from work to find Tyler on the phone in his office, door closed, voice raised in what sounded like an argument. I could hear fragments through the door, something about payment schedules and additional time, and not what we agreed to. When Tyler emerged 20 minutes later, his face was flushed and his jaw was tight with anger. "Everything okay?" I asked from the kitchen, where I was preparing dinner. "Fine," Tyler said curtly. "Just dealing with a difficult client." "Want to talk about it?" "No." The sharpness of his response was so unlike Tyler that I stopped chopping vegetables and turned to look at him. He was standing at the kitchen island, gripping the edge hard enough that his knuckles were white. "Tyler, what's going on? And don't say nothing, because clearly something is very wrong." For a moment, I thought he might actually tell me. His expression softened, and he looked like he was about to speak. Then his phone buzzed with a text message, and whatever openness I'd glimpsed disappeared immediately. "I need to take care of this," he said, already moving toward the door. "Don't wait up." "Tyler, wait." But he was already gone, leaving me standing in the kitchen with half-prepared dinner and a growing sense that the man I'd been living with for almost a year was becoming a stranger. That night, lying alone in our bed, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge what I'd been avoiding for weeks. Tyler wasn't just stressed about his business, he was hiding something from me. The question was whether it was something he was ashamed of or something more dangerous. I thought about my training in financial forensics, how I'd learned to trace the flow of money to uncover hidden truths. People lied about a lot of things, but money never did. Numbers told stories that people tried to conceal. For the first time since we'd moved in together, I found myself wondering what Tyler's financial records would reveal if I had access to them. And for the first time in our relationship, I was genuinely afraid of what I might discover. The woman who'd fallen in love with Tyler's honesty and transparency was slowly realizing that those qualities might have been as carefully constructed as everything else about him. But I wasn't ready to investigate the man I loved. Not yet. I should have trusted my instincts sooner. The breakup came on a rainy Thursday evening in late October, exactly 13 months after Tyler had first walked into my life. I'd been expecting some kind of conversation about our relationship. The distance between us had become impossible to ignore, but I wasn't prepared for the coldness in Tyler's voice when he finally spoke. "I think we need to talk," Tyler said, not looking up from his laptop as I came home from work. He was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and his phone, which had been buzzing constantly for the past hour. "Okay," I said carefully, setting down my purse and noting the formal tone he'd used. "What about us? This?" Tyler gestured vaguely at the space between us. "It's not working anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What's not working?" Tyler finally looked at me, and I was shocked by the lack of warmth in his expression. It was like looking at a stranger wearing Tyler's face. "Sarah, you're a wonderful person, but we want different things. I need to focus on rebuilding my business, and I can't do that with the complications of a serious relationship." "Complications?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Is that what I am to you now?" "That's not what I meant," Tyler said, but his tone remained detached. "Look, we've had a good run, but it's time to be realistic. You need someone who can give you the stability you deserve, and I need space to figure out my life." I stared at him, searching for any sign of the man who'd told me he loved me just weeks earlier, who'd talked about marriage and planning our future together. "Tyler, where is this coming from? If you're stressed about money, we can work through that together. I've told you I want to help. I don't want your help, Tyler interrupted sharply. And I don't want to work through anything together. I want out. The finality in his voice was devastating. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a conversation that made no sense. But we love each other. You said you wanted to marry me. People say a lot of things, Tyler replied with a shrug that felt like a slap. Things change. I stood there in my own kitchen, in the home we'd shared for 8 months, feeling completely unmoored. The man I'd planned to spend my life with was calmly dismantling our relationship like he was canceling a subscription service. So that's it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 13 months together, and you're just done? I think it's better if we make a clean break, Tyler said, already turning his attention back to his laptop. You can take your time, finding a new place. I'm not trying to throw you out on the street. How generous, I said, anger finally cutting through the shock. And what about Luna? She's your cat, Tyler said without looking up. Take her with you. The casual dismissal of Luna, who he'd claimed to love, who'd been curled up in his lap, just that morning, was somehow the detail that made everything feel real. This wasn't a rough patch or a stress-induced argument. Tyler was actually ending our relationship, and he seemed to feel nothing about it. I don't understand, I said, my voice breaking. 2 weeks ago you were talking about spring weddings. What changed? Tyler was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. Sarah, I think you've been more invested in this relationship than I have. Maybe I didn't handle that well, but I can't pretend to feel something I don't. The words were designed to make me doubt my own perceptions, to make me think I'd been foolish for believing in what we'd had together. But even through my heartbreak, something about Tyler's explanation felt wrong. The timing, the coldness, the complete personality shift. None of it aligned with the man I'd known for over a year. Fine, I said finally, pride forcing me to stand straighter. If this is what you want, I won't fight you on it. But I need time to find a place and pack my things. Of course, Tyler said, his tone businesslike. Take whatever time you need. I spent the next 3 days in a haze of grief and practical planning. I called in sick to work, searched for apartments online, and began the painful process of separating my life from Tyler's. He was polite but distant, treating me like a roommate whose lease was ending rather than someone he'd claimed to love. What hurt most was how easily Tyler seemed to adjust to the new dynamic. He didn't appear sad or conflicted about our breakup. If anything, he seemed relieved, like I'd been a burden he was finally free of. When I asked if we could talk about what had gone wrong, Tyler deflected. There's no point in rehashing everything, he said. Let's just focus on moving forward. But moving forward felt impossible when I didn't understand what had happened. The Tyler who'd broken up with me seemed like a completely different person from the one I'd fallen in love with. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, transforming him from loving partner to cold stranger overnight. I found a small apartment in Ballard and signed a lease for December 1st. Tyler helped me carry boxes to my car without complaint, making polite conversation about traffic and the weather. When I loaded Luna's carrier for the last time, she looked back at Tyler with confusion, as if she too couldn't understand why. We were leaving. Take care of yourself, Sarah, Tyler said as I prepared to drive away from the condo where I'd been happiest in my adult life. You too, I replied, though what I really wanted to say was, I don't know who you are anymore. As I drove to my new apartment with Luna crying in her carrier, I felt like I was mourning 2 losses. The relationship I'd thought we had, and the man I'd thought Tyler was. What I didn't realize was that the Tyler I'd fallen in love with had never existed at all, and the real Tyler Matthews was just getting started. The harassment started 2 weeks after I moved out. At first, it was subtle enough that I convinced myself it was coincidental. Tyler showing up at the same coffee shop I'd always frequented, appearing at the grocery store where I did my weekly shopping, sitting 3 tables away at the restaurant, where Debbie and I had our standing Friday night dinner. "Is that Tyler?" Debbie asked, noticing him before I did during our second week at Portage Bay Cafe. "What's he doing here?" I turned to look, and there he was, sitting alone with a newspaper and a cup of coffee, not seeming to notice us at all. But I knew Tyler's routine well enough to know he'd never been a coffee shop person, preferring to make his own at home. And Portage Bay was 15 minutes from his condo, in a neighborhood he'd never shown any interest in before. "Probably just trying out new places," I said, though my stomach churned with unease. This area has gotten really popular lately. But when Tyler appeared at 3 more of my regular spots over the next week, I could no longer pretend it was coincidental. Someone who'd claimed he needed space was spending an awful lot of time in my space. The phone call started on a Tuesday evening. My phone would ring with Tyler's number, but when I answered, there would be silence on the other end before the line went dead. The first few times, I assumed it was accidental, pocket dials or misdials. But after a week of these calls coming every night around the same time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. "Just block his number," Morgan suggested when I mentioned it during lunch. "Problem solved." "I tried that," I admitted. "But then he started calling from different numbers, and now he's texting too." The texts were the most unsettling part. They weren't threatening or explicitly inappropriate, which somehow made them worse. They were written in Tyler's familiar tone, as if we were still together and this was normal communication. "Saw Luna in your window tonight. She looks happy in her new place. Hope you're remembering to lock your car. This neighborhood isn't as safe as mine. That blue dress you wore to work today looked nice. Always loved you in blue." Each message felt like a violation, a reminder that Tyler was watching me more closely than I'd realized. How had he seen Luna in my window? When had he observed me? At work? How long had he been monitoring my daily routine? I started changing my patterns, varying my routes to work, shopping at different stores, eating at restaurants I'd never been to before. But Tyler seemed to adapt to my changes almost immediately, appearing wherever I went as if he had some kind of tracking system. "This is stalking, Sarah," my friend Matthew Rodriguez said when I finally called him for advice. As a detective with the Seattle Police Department, Matthew had seen enough harassment cases to recognize the signs. "You need to document everything and consider getting a restraining order." "But he's not really doing anything," I protested, even as I heard how weak that sounded. "He's not threatening me or trying to contact me directly. He's just around." Being around in a pattern designed to intimidate you is absolutely doing something, Matthew said firmly. "Keep a log of every time you see him, every call, every text. Take photos if you can do it safely. This behavior usually escalates." "Escalates how?" Matthew was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, in my experience, guys who can't accept a breakup and resort to stalking behavior often have deeper issues than just hurt feelings. Tyler's showing you a level of control and persistence that's concerning. Please take this seriously." I started the documentation that night, writing down every incident I could remember from the past month. The list was longer than I'd expected, filling 3 pages with encounters I'd initially dismissed as coincidences. Seeing it all laid out in chronological order, the pattern was undeniable. The breakthrough came when Tyler made his first real mistake. He left a voicemail. I'd been in a meeting when my phone rang with an unknown number, so Tyler's call went straight to voicemail. When I listened to the message later, I could hear background noise that sounded like wind and traffic, as if he was calling from outside. "Sarah, I saw you having lunch with your coworker today," Tyler's voice said, sounding casual, but with an undercurrent of something darker. "You looked stressed. I know this transition has been hard, but you don't need to discuss our private business with other people. Some things should stay between us." The message chilled me for several reasons. First, Tyler had been watching me closely enough to identify my lunch companion. Second, he'd somehow determined that we were discussing him, though we'd been sitting inside a restaurant with windows that couldn't have allowed him to hear our conversation. Third, the subtle threat in his tone, the implication that he was monitoring my conversations and disapproved of my choices. But most unsettling was the possessive language. Our private business. Between us. Tyler was talking like we were still in a relationship, like he still had some claim to control my actions and conversations. I forwarded the voicemail to Matthew immediately, along with screenshots of all Tyler's texts and photos I'd managed to take of him during his coincidental appearances at my regular locations. "This is definitely stalking," Matthew confirmed after reviewing everything. "And that voicemail crosses into harassment territory. We've got enough for a restraining order now, and I'd recommend you apply for one immediately." "What if that makes him angry?" I asked. "What if it escalates things?" "Sarah, things are already escalating," Matthew said gently. "Tyler's behavior is obsessive and controlling. In my experience, men who stalk their ex-girlfriends rarely stop on their own. They need legal intervention." That night, as I sat in my small apartment with Luna curled up beside me, I realized how completely Tyler had disrupted my sense of safety. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, checking locks multiple times, avoiding places I'd once enjoyed. The man who'd claimed to love me was terrorizing me, and he was doing it with the methodical precision of someone who'd planned every move. I filed for the restraining order the next morning, though I had a sinking feeling that a piece of paper wasn't going to stop someone as determined as Tyler had proven to be. I was right to be worried. The restraining order only made Tyler more creative in his pursuit of control over my life. And it set in motion the events that would lead to my basement discovery, and the night everything changed forever. The restraining order was served to Tyler on a Friday afternoon in January. By Sunday evening, I knew it had been a terrible mistake. The escalation was immediate and terrifying. Where Tyler's previous harassment had been subtle, designed to make me question whether it was really happening, his new approach was blatantly obvious. He wanted me to know he was watching, and he wanted me to know that a court order meant nothing to him. Saturday morning, I found a dozen red roses on my doorstep with a note. "Sorry you felt the need to involve lawyers. I just miss you. Tapiti Saturday." Afternoon, my car tires were slashed while I was grocery shopping. Security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the time frame when it happened. Saturday evening, Tyler called from yet another new number, leaving a voicemail that made my blood freeze. "Sarah, you're making this harder than it needs to be. I love you. Why can't you see that? We belong together, and I'm not giving up on us." Sunday morning brought the most disturbing escalation yet. I woke up to find my apartment door unlocked. Nothing was missing, but several items had been moved just slightly. My coffee mug turned to face a different direction, a book placed on a different shelf. Luna's food bowl shifted 3 inches to the left. Tyler had been inside my apartment while I slept. I called Matthew immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. "He was in my apartment, Matt. He was here while I was sleeping." "Pack a bag right now," Matthew said without hesitation. "You're not staying there another night. Do you have somewhere safe you can go?" I ended up at Debbie's house in Fremont, a small bungalow with good security and a protective roommate who owned 2 large dogs. But even there, I didn't feel safe. Tyler had proven he could circumvent locks, evade security cameras, and ignore legal restrictions. What was to stop him from following me anywhere? "This has to stop," Debbie said as we sat in her living room Monday evening, Luna hiding under the coffee table. "There has to be something the police can do." "The restraining order violation is a felony," Matthew explained during his visit that night. "But we need more evidence. Tyler's being careful not to leave fingerprints or DNA, and the security camera malfunctions look suspicious but aren't proof of tampering." "What about the roses? The unlocked door?" "No prints on the roses, and the lock situation could theoretically be explained as user error," Matthew said grimly. "Tyler's either very lucky or very smart about covering his tracks." Or very experienced, I said quietly, a thought that had been nagging at me. Matt, what if I'm not Tyler's first victim? What if he's done this before? Matthew's expression sharpened. That's actually a really good point. Give me Tyler's full name and date of birth. I'll run a background check and see if there are any patterns. What Matthew discovered 2 days later changed everything I thought I knew about Tyler Matthews. Sarah, I need you to sit down, Matthew said when he called Thursday afternoon. Tyler's background check came back, and there are some things you need to know. My stomach dropped. What kind of things? First, Tyler Matthews has lived in 4 different cities over the past 10 years: Portland, Sacramento, Phoenix, and now Seattle. In each location, he was involved with women who later reported stalking and harassment. I felt sick. Reported? To whom? 2 restraining orders, 1 criminal charge that was later dropped when the victim relocated, and 1 suspicious house fire that destroyed the complainant's home while she was out of town. House fire? My voice came out as a whisper. Phoenix, 3 years ago. A woman named Rebecca Martinez had been dating Tyler for about a year before she broke up with him. She filed a restraining order after he began stalking her. 2 weeks later, her house burned down while she was visiting. Family in New Mexico. The fire department ruled it arson, but they never found enough evidence to charge anyone. Did Rebecca think Tyler was responsible? She told police she was certain it was him, but Tyler had an alibi. He was supposedly in Los Angeles on business. The case went cold. I was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Matt, if Tyler has done this before, if he's escalated to arson— I'm already ahead of you, Matthew said. I've contacted the other jurisdictions to see if there are more victims who didn't report, and I'm putting together a comprehensive file. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. If Tyler follows his previous pattern, the harassment is going to continue escalating until one of 2 things happens. Either he gets arrested with enough evidence to put him away, or what? Or you disappear from his life completely, permanently. Weight of Matthew's words settled over me like a shroud. Tyler wasn't just a heartbroken ex-boyfriend who couldn't let go. He was a predator with a pattern, someone who had systematically targeted and terrorized multiple women across multiple states. There's more, Matthew continued. I did some digging into Tyler's business records. That flooding incident at the Belltown project. There's no record of any insurance claim being filed. No permit issues, no construction delays, no client complaints. What does that mean? It means Tyler's financial crisis was probably fabricated. The stress, the mood changes, the secrecy about his business problems, it was all an act. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. But why would he fake a crisis? Think about it, Sarah. What happened after Tyler started having business problems? I ran through the timeline in my mind. He became more controlling, more secretive. He started pushing me away, and then he broke up with you in a way that was designed to make you feel rejected and confused, Matthew finished. Sarah, I think Tyler planned the entire breakup. The business crisis gave him an excuse to change his behavior and end the relationship on his terms, in a way that would leave you emotionally vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? To exactly what he's doing now. The stalking, the harassment, the psychological manipulation. Tyler's not trying to win you back, Sarah. He's trying to destroy your sense of security and control your life. As Matthew's words sank in, I realized that everything I'd experienced over the past year had been orchestrated. Tyler hadn't just broken my heart. He'd been playing a long, calculated game from the very beginning. And I was starting to understand that the game wasn't over. It was just entering its final, most dangerous phase. That night, lying in Debbie's guest room with Luna pressed against my side, I made a decision. I wasn't going to run from Tyler Matthews. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, changing cities, abandoning everything I'd built. Tyler had picked the wrong woman to terrorize, He'd chosen someone who specialized in uncovering hidden truths, following paper trails, and exposing people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. If Tyler wanted to play games, I was going to teach him what it meant to play against someone who was better at it than he was. The plan started forming the moment I realized Tyler's endgame. He wasn't going to stop stalking me until something forced him to stop. The pattern Matthew had uncovered showed that Tyler escalated his harassment until his victims either fled the state or something more permanent happened to remove them from his reach. But I had advantages Tyler's previous victims hadn't possessed. I was a forensic accountant with a detective friend who was now actively investigating Tyler's pattern of abuse. More importantly, I was angry in a way that had crystallized into cold, calculating fury. "I want to set a trap," I told Matthew during our meeting at the police station on Friday morning. "Tyler thinks he's controlling this situation. But what? If we let him think he's winning while we gather enough evidence to destroy him?" Matthew looked skeptical. "Sarah, that's incredibly dangerous. Tyler's behavior is escalating rapidly, and if he thinks you're vulnerable, he'll make a mistake," I finished. "Matt, Tyler's gotten away with this pattern for years because his victims have always been reactive. They've run or hidden or tried to avoid him. What if instead of running, I controlled the environment, made him come to me on my terms?" "What are you thinking?" I pulled out a folder I'd prepared, filled with research I'd done over the past week. Tyler's pattern shows he escalates to property destruction when restraining orders don't work. In Phoenix, he burned down Rebecca Martinez's house. I think he's building up to something similar here, which is exactly why you need to stay far away from him. Or, I said, spreading out property records on Matthew's desk, I give him a target that's actually a trap. I'd found the perfect location 3 days earlier, a small rental house in Georgetown, isolated enough to give Tyler privacy for whatever he was planning, but positioned where surveillance could be set up without detection. The property had been on the market for months, and the owner was desperate enough to accept a 6-month lease with the understanding that I might need to terminate early. "You want to use yourself as bait," Matthew said, understanding my plan. "I want to control the narrative," I corrected. "Tyler thinks he's the hunter and I'm the prey. But what if I'm actually the one setting the trap?" The logistics took 2 weeks to arrange. Matthew couldn't officially sanction my plan, but he could ensure that when Tyler made his move, law enforcement would be ready to respond. We installed hidden cameras throughout the rental house and set up motion sensors that would alert Matthew's phone to any activity on the property. I made the move to Georgetown appear reluctant and desperate, as if I was running out of options. I complained to mutual acquaintances about having to relocate again, mentioned financial difficulties that would make it hard to move out of state, and made sure word would get back to Tyler that I was isolated and vulnerable in my new location. "This is either brilliant or insane," Debbie said as she helped me move boxes into the rental house. "I'm honestly not sure which." "Maybe both," I admitted, setting up Luna's things in the bedroom. "But Tyler's not going to stop until he's forced to stop. This way, I control when and how that happens." The psychological preparation was harder than the logistical arrangements. I had to be ready to live with the knowledge that Tyler was watching, waiting, planning whatever final escalation he had in mind. Every night, I went to sleep knowing that tomorrow might be the day Tyler decided to act. But I also used the time to research everything I could about Tyler's business dealings. My forensic accounting skills, combined with Matthew's access to financial databases, painted a picture of a man who'd been running sophisticated fraud schemes alongside his stalking. Pattern Tyler's construction business was largely fictional. He had legitimate contracts and completed projects, but the financial structures were designed to hide assets and avoid taxes. More disturbing, I discovered that in each city where Tyler had terrorized a woman, he'd also been involved in insurance, fraud cases, fires that had destroyed businesses or properties right before major financial difficulties would have been discovered. Tyler's not just a stalker, I explained to Matthew as we reviewed the financial evidence. He's been using his relationships with women as cover for his fraud schemes. When the relationships end and he needs to disappear, he destroys evidence and starts over in a new city. And you think that's what he's planning here? I think Tyler's planning something bigger than just revenge against me. I think he's planning to disappear entirely, and he wants to take out any witnesses before he goes. The insight changed how I approached the trap I was setting. This wasn't just about stopping Tyler's stalking. It was about ending a criminal enterprise that had been operating across multiple states for years. 3 weeks after moving into the Georgetown house, I found the first sign that Tyler was preparing for his endgame. He'd been researching chemical accelerants online, using public computers to avoid detection. But Tyler had gotten sloppy, and one of the computers he'd used had security cameras that captured him clearly. He's planning a fire, Matthew confirmed after reviewing the footage. The question is when and how big. Soon, I said, checking the hidden cameras I'd positioned around the property. Tyler's getting impatient. The longer I stay in one place without running, the more it disrupts his sense of control. That night, I made my final preparations. Charged my phone fully, checked that all the surveillance equipment was functioning, and made sure Luna was safely staying with Debbie until this was over. Tyler Matthews thought he was about to claim his final victory. Instead, he was about to discover that the woman he'd been hunting had been hunting him right back. And unlike Tyler's previous victims, I wasn't planning to be the one who disappeared when the smoke cleared. Tyler made his move on a Tuesday night. In March, exactly 4 months after he'd broken up with me. I was ready. The motion sensors detected him at 11:47 p.m., creeping around the perimeter of the Georgetown house like he was casing it for vulnerabilities. Through the hidden cameras, I watched him check windows, test door locks, and examine the electrical panel mounted on the side of the house. His movements were methodical, practiced. This was clearly not his first time planning an arson. I was watching the live feed from Matthew's unmarked surveillance van, parked 3 blocks away where Tyler wouldn't notice it. He's wearing gloves and a baseball cap pulled low, I whispered into my headset. But we've got clear footage of his face from the camera by the front door. Copy that, Matthew replied. Units are in position, but we need him to actually start the fire before we can move. Trespassing won't get us the serious charges we need. Tyler circled the house twice more before returning to his car, which he'd parked 2 streets over. But instead of leaving, he sat in the vehicle for almost an hour, occasionally checking his phone and watching the house. I realized he was waiting, to make sure I was asleep and wouldn't notice his activities until it was too late to escape. This is it, I said as Tyler finally got out of his car again, this time carrying a large duffel bag. He's coming back to finish the job. What Tyler didn't know was that I wasn't actually in the house. I'd been staying in the surveillance van with Matthew for the past 3 nights, ever since our intelligence suggested Tyler was preparing to act. The house was empty except for the cameras and accelerant detection equipment we'd installed. Tyler's second approach was more aggressive. He went straight to the electrical panel and began working on it with tools from his bag, clearly planning to create the appearance of an electrical fire. But after 10 minutes of apparent frustration, he abandoned that approach and moved to a basement window instead. He can't make the electrical fire look convincing, Matthew observed. Now he's going to plan B. Through the basement camera, we watched Tyler break the window and climb inside. He was carrying containers of what appeared to be gasoline and some kind of chemical accelerant. The basement was small and filled with the kind of items that would burn quickly: old furniture, cardboard boxes, and cleaning supplies I'd strategically placed to create the perfect storm for a fast-moving fire. Tyler worked efficiently, dousing the basement with accelerant and setting up what looked like a delayed ignition system. He clearly wanted to be far away when the fire started, giving himself an alibi while ensuring the house would be fully engulfed before fire department could respond. But Tyler made his crucial mistake when he pulled out his phone to record his work. The basement camera captured him filming himself setting up the arson, presumably as some kind of trophy video or insurance documentation. In the recording, Tyler was clearly visible and audible as he explained what he was doing. "This is for all the women who think they can just walk away," Tyler said to his phone camera, his voice carrying clearly on our audio feed. "Sarah Ackles thought she could ruin my life with restraining orders and police reports. Well, let's see how she likes having no life at all." The confession was even more damning than we'd hoped for. Tyler wasn't just admitting to arson. He was confessing to planning murder and revealing that he saw this as part of a larger pattern of violence against women. Tyler finished his setup and headed back toward the basement window. But before he could escape, Matthew gave the signal. "All units move in. Suspect is in the basement attempting to exit through the north window." I watched through the cameras as Tyler realized the house was surrounded. He tried to run but was tackled by 2 officers before he could make it 10 feet from the window. The duffel bag he dropped contained enough accelerant to burn down a city block, along with detailed plans and photographs of not just my house, but several other properties around Seattle. "Sarah Ackles, you're under arrest," one of the officers called out, apparently thinking I was still inside the house. "Actually," I said, stepping out of the surveillance van with Matthew, "I'm right here." The look on Tyler's face when he saw me was worth every terrifying moment of the past 4 months. The realization that he'd been outmaneuvered, that his intended victim had been controlling the situation all along, that his carefully planned perfect crime had been nothing more than an elaborate trap. "You set me up," Tyler snarled as the officers cuffed him. "No," I replied calmly. "I gave you enough rope to hang yourself. You chose to use it." As the officers led Tyler away, Matthew's team began processing the crime scene. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage of Tyler planning and attempting arson, audio confessions to multiple crimes, physical evidence of accelerants and incendiary devices, and documentation showing this was part of a larger criminal pattern. "How does it feel?" Matthew asked as we watched Tyler being loaded into a police car. "Like I can finally breathe again," I said. But even as I spoke, I knew this wasn't over. Tyler's arrest was just the beginning of a much larger reckoning, because while Tyler had been planning to burn down my house, I'd been planning something much more comprehensive. I'd been building a case that would expose not just his attempted murder, but his entire criminal enterprise spanning multiple states and multiple victims. Tyler Matthews had spent months trying to destroy my life. Now it was time for me to return the favor by destroying everything he'd built through years of fraud, theft, and violence. The hunter had become the hunted, and Tyler was about to learn that some prey bite back harder than he could have ever imagined. Tyler's arraignment was scheduled for Thursday morning, but I had other plans for Wednesday evening. While he sat in a holding cell contemplating his legal troubles, I was implementing the final phase of my revenge, one that would burn his entire world to the ground more thoroughly than any fire ever could. I'd spent 4 months building a comprehensive financial investigation into Tyler Matthews' criminal enterprise. What I'd discovered was even more extensive than I'd originally suspected. Tyler hadn't just been running insurance fraud schemes. He'd been orchestrating a sophisticated network of financial crimes that had defrauded investors, banks, and insurance companies out of millions of dollars. "Are you sure you want to do this tonight?" Matthew asked as we sat in my car outside Tyler's downtown office building. "You could wait until after the trial. Let the legal system handle everything." "The legal system will handle the arson charge," I replied, checking the files I'd prepared. But Tyler's victims from the past decade deserve justice too, and I want him to know that it was me who brought down his empire. Tyler's business partners, Zachary Klein and Benny Morrison, were about to have the worst evening of their professional lives. I'd traced their involvement in Tyler's schemes through a network of shell companies, fraudulent contracts, and forged documents that showed they weren't just complicit in Tyler's crimes, they were active participants. At exactly 6 p.m., I walked into the offices of Matthews Development Group, where I knew both men were working late to handle the crisis of Tyler's arrest. The receptionist had already left for the day, so I let myself in using the keycard Tyler had given me months earlier, a detail he'd clearly forgotten about during his careful planning. Sarah? Zachary looked up from his desk in shock as I entered. The main office area. What are you doing here? Tyler said you two broke up. We did, I said calmly, setting my briefcase on the conference table. But Tyler forgot to ask for his keycard back. We need to talk. Benny emerged from Tyler's office carrying a box of what looked like financial documents. You can't be in here, he said nervously. This is private property. Actually, as of this afternoon, this is a crime scene, I replied, pulling out copies of federal warrants. The FBI will be here tomorrow morning to seize all records related to Matthews Development Group's financial operations. I thought you gentlemen might want to know what they're going to find. I opened my briefcase and spread out photocopies of the evidence I'd compiled over the past 4 months. Bank records showing fraudulent transfers, insurance claims for non-existent damages, contract forgeries, and investor statements revealing millions in missing funds. What is this? Zachary demanded, but his face had gone pale as he recognized some of the documents. This is a complete financial audit of Tyler's business operations going back 8 years, I explained. It shows systematic fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering involving both of your signatures on numerous documents. Benny was frantically texting on his phone, probably trying to reach Tyler, not realizing that phones weren't allowed in holding cells. You can't prove any of this. These could be fabricated. Could be, I agreed. But they're not. And in about 12 hours, when the FBI finishes executing their warrant, they're going to find the originals of all these documents in Tyler's office safe. The safe he thought no one else knew about. I pulled out a final folder and placed it in front of them. But here's what I find most interesting. Tyler kept meticulous records of his crimes, including detailed notes about how he planned to frame both of you if he ever got caught. The folder contained copies of Tyler's handwritten notes, documenting his plans to make Zachary and Benny the fall guys for his financial schemes. If Tyler had succeeded in killing me and disappearing, he would have left behind evidence that would have sent both men to prison while he started over with a new identity in another country. That's impossible, Zachary whispered. But he was reading Tyler's notes describing how Z and B are too stupid to realize they're being set up. And when this all comes down, they'll take the heat while I disappear with the offshore accounts. Tyler never intended to include you in his escape plan, I continued. You were always disposable to him, just like I was supposed to be. Benny slumped into a chair, the reality of their situation sinking in. What do you want from us? I want you to tell the FBI everything, I said. Full cooperation, complete disclosure, and testimony against Tyler that will ensure he never sees the outside of a prison cell again. And if we don't? Zachary asked. Then you go down with him, I replied simply. The evidence shows you're guilty of multiple federal crimes, but it also shows you were being manipulated by someone who was planning to destroy you anyway. The FBI might be willing to consider reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation. I gathered up my documents and prepared to leave. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to decide. That's when the FBI arrives, and that's when this all becomes public. Record. As I reached the door, Zachary called out, "Why are you doing this? Tyler's already been arrested. Isn't that enough?" I turned back to face them both. Tyler Matthews spent months terrorizing me, planning to murder me, and trying to destroy my life. But more than that, he spent years victimizing women across multiple states while stealing millions of dollars from innocent people. Arresting him for arson is just the beginning. I want him to face justice for every single crime he's committed, every life he's ruined, every woman he's terrorized. And I want him to know that it was the woman he tried to kill who brought down everything he built. I left them sitting in their office, surrounded by evidence of their own complicity and Tyler's betrayal. By morning, both men had contacted the FBI to negotiate cooperation agreements. Tyler's criminal empire, built over a decade of fraud and violence, crumbled in less than 24 hours. And when he learned what had happened, he would understand that his attempt to destroy me had instead led to his own complete destruction. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey had proven to be far more dangerous than the predator ever imagined. The sentencing hearing took place on a brilliant Thursday morning in October, almost exactly 2 years after Tyler had first walked into my life at that gym. I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse, watching as the man who'd tried to murder me received multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The charges were extensive: attempted murder, arson, stalking, wire, fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud across 4 states. The evidence I'd helped compile, combined with testimony from Zachary and Benny, had painted a picture of a criminal enterprise that had operated for over a decade. "Mr. Matthews," Judge Patricia Nakamura said as she delivered the sentence, "your crimes represent a pattern of predatory behavior that spans multiple jurisdictions and has victimized numerous individuals. The court finds that you pose a continuing danger to society and that rehabilitation is not a viable option." Tyler stood silently as the sentence was read, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive suits he'd worn during our relationship. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Tyler turned to look directly at me for the first time since his arrest. "This is all her fault," he said, his voice carrying across the courtroom. "She destroyed my life because she couldn't handle being rejected." Even now, facing multiple life sentences, Tyler couldn't accept responsibility for his actions. He was still trying to rewrite the narrative, still attempting to position himself as the victim. "Mr. Matthews," Judge Nakamura replied coldly, "the evidence shows that you planned and attempted to murder Ms. Ackles, along with committing numerous other serious crimes. Your refusal to accept responsibility for your actions only reinforces the court's decision regarding your sentence." As Tyler was led away in shackles, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that he could never hurt me or anyone else again. Satisfaction that justice had been served not just for me, but for all his victims across multiple states. And something that might have been sadness for the person I'd thought Tyler was, even though I now knew that person had never existed. After the hearing, I met with FBI agent Sarah Francine, who had led the investigation into Tyler's financial crimes. "We wanted to thank you again," she said as we stood outside the courthouse. "Your financial analysis was crucial to understanding the scope of Tyler's operation. Without your work, he probably would have faced only the arson charges." "What about his other victims?" I asked. "The women from Portland, Sacramento, and Phoenix? They've all been contacted, and several are pursuing civil suits now that Tyler's been convicted. Rebecca Martinez, the woman from Phoenix, wanted me to give you this." Agent Francine handed me a letter. Inside, Rebecca had written about her own experience with Tyler and how his conviction had finally given her closure after years of fear. "Thank you for doing what I couldn't," she'd written. "You stopped him from hurting anyone else." The civil lawsuit I filed against Tyler's estate was settled 6 months later. The offshore accounts he'd planned to use for his escape were seized and distributed among his victims. I received a substantial settlement, though no amount of money could fully compensate for the trauma he'd caused. But the real reward wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that Tyler's pattern of victimization had finally been broken. The task force that had been formed to investigate his crimes had also uncovered connections to several other unsolved cases involving women who'd disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances in cities where Tyler had lived. A year after Tyler's sentencing, I received a call from Matthew. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," he said. "Her name is Morgan Patel, and she's starting a nonprofit organization for stalking victims. She heard about your case and wanted to talk to you about getting involved." The meeting led to my becoming a founding board member of the Phoenix Foundation an organization dedicated to helping stalking victims document their cases, navigate the legal system, and rebuild their lives. We named it after Rebecca Martinez's home city, where Tyler's pattern of escalation had first become clear. "You turned your trauma into something that helps other people," Morgan observed during one of our board meetings. "That takes incredible strength." "It was the only way I could make sense of what happened," I replied. "Tyler spent months trying to destroy my life. The best revenge was building something meaningful from the pieces." 2 years after Tyler's conviction, I moved back to my old neighborhood in Capitol Hill. Luna, now 7 years old and significantly more cautious around strangers, had adjusted well to our quieter life. I'd been promoted to senior partner at Henderson & Associates, specializing in forensic accounting for criminal cases. The apartment I'd shared with Tyler was long since sold, the proceeds going toward victim restitution. I'd bought a small house, with a yard where Luna could safely explore, something I'd dreamed about during those early days of our relationship when the future had seemed so bright. Some evenings, sitting on my back porch with Luna curled up beside me, I'd think about the woman I'd been before Tyler. She'd been cautious but not paranoid, trusting but not naive, independent but not isolated. In many ways, I'd had to rebuild that person from scratch, keeping the lessons Tyler had taught me about recognizing manipulation while refusing to let his actions turn me into someone permanently afraid. The smell of gasoline no longer made me panic. I'd learned to sleep through the night again. I'd even started dating someone, a kind, patient man who understood my history and respected the boundaries I'd needed to establish. Tyler had tried to destroy me with fire, but instead, he'd forged me into something stronger than he could have imagined. He'd wanted to reduce me to ashes, but I'd emerged from his flames more powerful than ever. And every day I woke up free while he remained caged was a victory he could never take away from me. The woman Tyler had tried to kill had not only survived, she had triumphed completely, and she had made sure he would never hurt anyone ever again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.